Have you ever wondered how large teams work together on the exact same project and are still able to keep track of and share all of their code? Well, the answer is pretty simple. It's actually Git and GitHub. Now, Git is a way of keeping track of all of the different changes that you make inside of your code, while GitHub is a way for you to share your code with other developers. So today, we're going to take a look at how we can download and install Git, how we can utilize Git, and then how we can push our projects to GitHub as well. So to get started, the first thing that you have to do is you need to create a GitHub account. And I'm not going to walk through that because it's pretty straightforward, but go ahead and create a GitHub account. I'm going to go ahead and sign in because I've already got one. So now that you've gone ahead and created a GitHub account, or you've logged into your GitHub account, it's time we go and download Git. Now, what Git is a version control system, and what it does is it keeps track of all of the different changes that you make inside of your code. And everyone on a team should have Git installed, and it should be tracking all of their changes for their specific project that they're working on. So whenever you make a change, it's going to be noted, and whenever you want to merge all of those changes with the current project that everyone's merging all their changes with, you can go ahead and do that, and Git is going to automatically know which changes that you made, where you made them, and if there's any issues, it's going to let you know about it. But it's not all the time that it has issues. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and download Git. Now, to get here, I just googled Git download, G-I-T download, and it should pop up on Google, and you should be able to be redirected to this page, and this should have the latest release for Git. So let's just go ahead and download it here. So once you launch the installer, you should be presented with a screen like this. We can go ahead and click next, and then there's nothing specific here that we actually need to select, so we can click next. We can click next on here, and this right here is just asking what you want your default code editor to be. I'm going to go ahead and choose Visual Studio's Code. Click next. Here we can select what the default name of the local branch is going to be called. You can leave it with the default, which is going to be currently master, or you can override that to a different value. I'm going to override it to local. This can be just about any name that you want. This is just going to be the name of the local branch that you're creating. Some people choose master, some people choose main. I'm just going to go ahead and go with local. Then it's going to ask us the path environments. I'm going to go ahead and keep it with the default. Click next. And then the rest of these, for the most part, we're just going to go ahead and keep with the default. So the SSL library, we're going to click next. We're going to click next here. We can click next here. Next here, next here, next here, next here, and then it should start installing for us. Once the installation is complete, you'll get a finish screen. I'm going to uncheck this because I don't care about the release notes, and we're going to click finish. So now that we've gone ahead and installed Git, now we have to create SSH keys so that we can authenticate with GitHub. So let's go ahead and open up a terminal. I'm going to open up PowerShell. Now, once PowerShell is open, we need to enter a specific command. So we need to generate SSH keys. So we're going to say SSH-keygen, followed by a -t, and then the encryption algorithm that we're going to use. GitHub recommends this ED25519, but if that doesn't work, you can also use the RSA key algorithm as well. But for this, I'm going to use this ED25519 algorithm, and then we're going to hit -C with a capital -C, followed by your email address. So we want to enter our email address inside of quotation marks, just like this, and then we can click enter. Now, once we do that, it should say generating public-private key pair, and then it's asking if we want to save it in a file, and it's recommending the default path for us. We can just go ahead and hit enter for the default path. Now it's asking for a passphrase. This is like a password for making changes in GitHub. I'm just going to leave it blank. You can leave it blank, or you can add a passphrase, whatever you want. and then it's going to create your SSH key right here. Now this next part is specific to Windows. So if you're using a Mac or Linux machine, I will leave the GitHub instructions down in the description down below if you want to go and check those out. Alternatively, I'll also leave a video link down in the description down below where you can see how you can do it on Mac and Linux machines. But let's go ahead and get started with the Windows version. Now the first thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that the SSH agent is running. So to do that, we actually need to run PowerShell in an administrative way. So to do that, we can go down here and right click on our taskbar and click Run as Administrator. Then we can accept the UAC, and we should have the administrator Windows PowerShell now. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to get the service. So we need to say git-service-name SSH-agent, followed by the pipe symbol, and then we can set service startup type is going to be manual, and we click enter. And as long as everything is all good, you shouldn't see anything happen. Now the next thing we need to do is we actually need to start the service. So we could say start service SSH-agent. And again, as long as everything went through well, you shouldn't have anything pop up. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to run the add command so we can add our SSH key to our SSH agent. So we could say SSH-add, followed by the path to the key that we created. So it's going to be this path right here that we created. So if we just right click to copy and paste that, now if we hit enter, that should say identity added to that specific path, and that should show you that you have added that specific key to your SSH agent. Now the next thing we need to do is we actually need to add the public key to our GitHub account. So the way that we can do that is we can open up our File Explorer, and we could go to this PC, the drive, and then we can click on Users, your specific user. Now, SSH was already shown for me, but it may not be shown for you. Sometimes it is hidden. Now, this .pub file right here is the public file, the public key that you created. Now, we can go ahead and right-click that, and we can open that with Notepad, code, whatever. I'm just going to go ahead and open it with code because it's right there. Now once it pops up, you can just copy the entire contents of it, including the email address at the end. Then we can go to our GitHub account, and we could go to settings here, and under settings we can find SSH and GPT keys, and we can click on that. Now we can click on new SSH key, and we could put a title for it, whatever title you want. It's just an identifier for the SSH key itself. So I'm just going to say test key. And we want to make sure that it is an authentication key because we are authenticating with GitHub using this key. And then we can go ahead and paste that entire key without any extra spaces or line breaks into that key field here. And then we can click on add SSH key. Now you should see your new key pop up here, and it should say never used read/write as long as you have read/write access for this key. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to initialize a project for Git, and you're going to have to do this for every single project that you work on. Now we have to find the root level folder that our project is contained in. So as long as you don't have a huge massive project that's got a bunch of nested levels, it should look something similar to this with an HTML, CSS, JavaScript file, maybe some assets. This is where you want to initialize your Git project. So to do this, we're going to open this in our terminal, and we are going to just say git init. Just like that, and it's going to initialize an empty Git repository for us. Now, by default, this .git folder is hidden, but if you have already shown hidden items, you should be able to see it. Now, do not touch anything inside of this Git folder. If you do, it's going to break things. So I recommend to just leave it hidden and pretend it doesn't even exist. But this is the file that Git needs to track all of your changes for your files. Now let's go ahead and open up this with code here. Now once this has been opened with code, you'll notice a little bit of a change here. You'll notice that all of these have a text color of green and they have this little U beside them. This is basically meaning that these are new files. These are completely untracked yet. So already Git has already identified all of the files in our project, and it identified which ones we are tracking and which ones we are not tracking. Now we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, so let's step back for just a moment, because the next thing we need to do is we actually need to connect this to GitHub. So to connect this project to GitHub, we first need to go ahead and create a brand new project on our GitHub. So let's go ahead and click on a new project here, and we can type in the repository name. I'm just going to say this is a test, and we can type in a description optionally if we want. This is a test for a video. Then we can make it public or we can make it private. Only you can see it if it is private. So if you want people to see it, I would recommend making it public. And you can add a .readme file or a readme file. This is going to show up on the GitHub project page, maybe information about the specific project or how to utilize the specific service that you have posted on GitHub. This is just like an instructional file of some kind. I'm not going to add one because this is just a test and this is going to be deleted here within the hour. So we're going to go ahead and click create repository. Now we get this empty repository screen pop up, and it's giving us information about how we can quickly set up our repository here. Now GitHub doesn't work with HTTPS anymore. It only works over SSH. That's why we already created the SSH keys and added them to our GitHub profile. Now this right here is instructions on how you can create a new project from the command line. We're not too worried about this because we've already got our own project that we just started. So we're going to look at this one here instead. Now let's go ahead and go back to our code here. Now it's time we can actually start writing Git commands. So the way that we can do this inside of our VS Code is we can open up the terminal. So control and tilde, or you could go up here and click on terminal and new terminal. Now, the first command that we want to take a look at is actually going to be the git status command. And this is going to show all untracked and tracked files that have changes that need to be made. So any file that has had a change that's made or is a new file. So we can start tracking these files by saying git add, and we could select everything just by using the period, or we could select specific files that we want to add. So maybe if we want the index.html file to start being tracked, now we could say git status, and we can see right here the index.html file is now being tracked, but these two down here yet have not been tracked. So let's actually just go ahead and track everything now. So we could say git add period, and that's going to add everything that is not being tracked to the tracked files list. So now if we say git status, we can see all three of those files are now being tracked. Now before we do anything else, we actually need to tell Git who we are. So what we're going to do is we're going to edit the global config file for Git. But don't worry, we only have to do this once and then you don't have to worry about it. So the first command that we need to run is going to be git config -- global user.email followed by your email address. And I would recommend using the same email address that you use for GitHub whenever you do this. And those need to be inside of quotation marks, just like a string. And we can click enter. And that's going to set up our email address for Git. And the only other thing we need to do is we need to tell Git our name. So we're going to run the exact same command, git config -- global user.name this time. And it needs to know our name. So we're going to put in our name here. First name and last name, first name, a whole name, doesn't really matter. It's just an identifier for this specific machine that you're using. And we can click enter. And that will tell GitHub who we are, and that'll tell Git who we are as well. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we actually need to commit all of our changes. So if you remember git status here, you can see that we are currently tracking all 3 of our files here, and these are currently in what's called staging, and this is the process right before you commit everything to Git. So this is where you can make changes or whatever before you actually fully commit to it. So let's say we're ready to commit. So let's say git commit -m, and this allows you to add a specific message for this specific commit, because this is something you're going to be doing just about every single day, is you're going to be committing something, and you will just want to specify what it is that you change. So I'm going to say this is the initial commit, and if we hit enter, we can see that we got 3 files changed, 0 insertions and 0 deletions. So that looks promising that everything was committed. And you can see up here, all of that text, that green color, is completely gone now. And if we run git status, we can see nothing to commit, working tree clean. That means that we committed everything that was in staging whenever we wrote git commit. Now we can follow the instructions over here on GitHub and create our remote branch. Now, whenever we're creating a remote branch, the link to that specific branch is only going to be stored in the project. So if you open up another folder that doesn't have access to that specific Git project, then you're going to have to re-add that branch to that specific folder or that specific project. So every time that you want to push something, you have to make sure that it's connected to the correct repository inside of the correct project folder on your machine. So to do this, we're going to say exactly what GitHub says, git remote add, and then we can name our remote branch for our local project. So GitHub has origin on here. You can name it whatever you want, though. I'm just going to name it my GitHub repo, and then we can just copy this entire line right here, git@github.com, followed by this path to the specific branch that you're using. So if we just right click, that should paste it in, and that is going to add our specific branch to this project. Now, to make sure that that worked, we can run the command git remote -v, and as long as something pops up here, you should be able to see the name of the remote branch that you specified here, along with the path to that specific remote repo. Now, the next command that GitHub is telling us to run is this git branch -m main. Now, what this does is it's going to move or rename a specific project. Now, if you're happy with the name that your project has, then you don't have to worry about running this command. And if you want to see what the name of the project is that you have, you can run the git branch command, and this is going to only work if you've made at least one commit. If you haven't made a commit yet, then nothing is going to show up here. But if you have, then you're going to see the name of your specific local repo. Now, this is the specific local repo that we created, so as long as you're happy with this name, you don't have to worry about running this command. Now, the last thing that we need to do to get this on GitHub is we need to push it to GitHub. So GitHub is here telling us git push -u origin main. Now, in this context here from GitHub, origin is the remote branch and main is the local branch. So we need to specify the specific names that we named our local and our remote branches. So if you want to see your remote branch, you could say git remote -v, and if you want to see your local branch, you could see git branch, git branch, just like that, and that's going to specify the name of your remote branch and the name of your local branch. Now we can utilize those names to push that to GitHub. So we could say git push -u for upstream, and then our remote branch's name. So it's, in my case, it's going to be my GitHub repo, and then our local branch's name, and in my case it's going to be my local repo, and we can click enter. Now, if you set up a passphrase, this is where you're going to be entering one, and this is my personal Git account on my computer, so I'm going to go ahead and type in my passphrase, and it's going to go ahead and push those values or that project itself to GitHub. Now, if we go over here and we just refresh our GitHub page, it should pop up with those project files. And you can see our commit message, initial commit, has popped up here, and it shows when it was committed. But now that your code has been pushed to GitHub, you can share your code with anyone who wants to see it. So let's play around with this for a little bit. Now let's pretend that you and Jeff are working on this project together. But now that you have pushed your code to GitHub, Jeff can now pull that down from GitHub. So let's go ahead and pretend that Jeff is now going to enter the picture. So we're going to go outside of our current working directory, and we're going to pretend that this is Jeff. So inside of this folder, we are going to be Jeff here. So Jeff is going to find his folder that he wants to store his project files in. Then he's going to open that in his terminal, and Jeff is going to run the command git clone, and then he is going to copy the link to your GitHub, and he's going to paste that into his terminal. And Jeff is going to enter his passphrase here, and then inside of Jeff's folder, he should have another folder that contains all of your files that were on your GitHub page. Now Jeff is going to open this file with code, and he's going to make some modifications. So let's go ahead and make some modifications here for Jeff, and let's just say Jeff made this change. And we're going to save that. Now you can notice that we have a different colored index.html file. And this is because this file is being tracked, but it has modifications since the last commit. So let's take a look at it in our terminal here. So we could say git status, and we can see that these are modified files. So this index.html file has been modified since the last commit. So we can go ahead and add all of this to staging by saying git add everything. Then we can say git commit -m, and we could say Jeff was here, and we could commit that. Now we can just make sure that this worked properly by saying git status, and we could see your branch is ahead of the remote branch by 1 commit. So it's telling us to use git push to publish your local commits. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll say git push, and we'll enter our passphrase again. Now if we go over here and we see now that this is changed back to its normal color, we should have got that working. So let's double check that by saying git status, and it says your branch is up to date. So let's go ahead and see that change published on GitHub by refreshing our GitHub page, and we could see that index.html file with the commit message of Jeff was here published 1 minute ago. Now it's your turn. We need to pull all of Jeff's changes from GitHub down to our local machine. So over here in our terminal, where we still have nothing in our index.html file, we can run the git pull command, and it's going to pull all of those files from GitHub once we enter our passphrase if we have to, and it's going to pull all of those changes from GitHub that Jeff made down to our local machine. Now let's take a step back for just a moment, because we just talked about a good bit of stuff. So whenever Jeff first got introduced into the project, Jeff had to clone our repository. But what does it mean to clone a repository? Well, a clone is whenever you have not even started on the project yet, the clone is going to pull the entire project from GitHub into a blank file for you. That way it gets pulled from GitHub, and all of the files along with all of the commits are pulled down from GitHub so that you're up to date with everything that has happened so far with the project. Now a clone is only really meant to be used whenever you are in that instance where you're just getting started with the project. You don't have anything started yet, but you need to work on this project. So you clone the repository that you have the current place where the project is at is then pulled down to your machine. And then once Jeff cloned that project, he then made a few changes, then he published those changes back to GitHub. That way you were able to pull all of Jeff's changes down to your machine, so that way your project is up to date with what Jeff just did. So now you and Jeff both have the exact same files, and you're able to share different changes with one another through GitHub. Now let's say that you've been tasked with working on a brand new experimental feature that you don't even know if it's going to be added to the finished product or not. And this project is going to take you maybe the next 3 to 4 weeks to work on. So how do you work on this project and keep track of all of your different changes without actually messing up the main branch that everyone else is using? Well, that's actually pretty straightforward. We're actually going to create a brand new branch that is a diverged copy of the original. So we're basically going to take a copy of the current branch that we're working on, and we're going to create a brand new branch that whenever you make changes on it is not going to affect the original branch. So let's see how this works. So to do this, we're going to first create the branch by using the git branch, and then we're going to specify the new branch's name. So we could say new feature branch, and if we hit enter, we can now run the git branch command, and we're going to see that our my local repo, the main one that we've been working on so far, is still there, along with this new feature branch. Now we can go ahead and switch over to that new feature branch by saying git checkout new feature. And now if we run the git branch command, we're going to see that we're currently working now on the new feature branch. Now let's say that we're working on this new branch and we have some new experimental feature p tag. It's the new experimental feature p tag, and we save that. Now we can see that we have changes that are waiting to be committed. So it's the end of the day. Let's go ahead and commit those changes for the day. So let's say git add everything, and then we're going to say git commit -m first day on the job, and we commit those new changes. Now it's the next day, and we've been asked to add a small feature to the main branch. So let's go ahead and swap over to the main branch. We could say git checkout, and we could say we want to switch to the my local repo, the main branch. And whoa, what happened to our experimental features? Well, this is the nice thing about Git and different branches. All of those changes that we made on the other branch are still there, but we've switched to a different branch that doesn't have those changes. So now all of the changes that we had previously on the other branch are not going to be reflected on the main branch. So we'll say we made some crazy changes or whatever. Now we're going back to our testing branch to finish out the day. So we'll say git checkout new feature, and oh, there's our experimental features. There they are. So to spit out what I'm trying to get at here is that we can create different branches to track changes for different things. So a lot of times you'll have a main branch, and then you'll have to fork off of that branch or check out a different branch, so that way you're not making changes to the main branch that is then going to be pushed at the end of the day or at the end of the week or whenever the main branch gets pushed to GitHub. And this really prevents a lot of bugs and features from getting into the main code, the production code, because a lot of times you have to merge those changes with the main branch, and a lot of times people are looking over those changes, people are testing those features. You know, you don't just grab the main branch and start changing things. You actually have to have some kind of security in place to make sure that only changes that we want added are actually added to the production copy of the main branch. And even with multiple branches, even with a side branch, we can still push these changes to GitHub, and we can still share these changes with more people. So maybe you get more people added to your team working on this new experimental feature, and you need to share the code with them for that. So we could say git branch to make sure we're working on the right branch, and we are the new feature branch. So we can go ahead and say git push, and then of course we still need to set a new upstream because we're completely separated from the other branch. So we need to set the upstream to this right here, and we type in our password again here. Now we can see on our GitHub page here that we have the my local repo, the main branch that we've been using, and we have this new features branch here as well. And you can see new feature had recent pushes up here, and then you can compare the differences between one branch and another. So we can make comparisons between the main branch, which is this my local repo branch, and then we can compare the differences between the new features branch, and we can request changes on here, or we could even merge it with a different branch. So we could select a completely different branch up here to merge it with. So maybe you've got a staging branch, maybe you got a testing branch, maybe you've got a production branch, and you can choose which branch you want to merge it to if you want to merge it at all. Now let's take a look at one more thing. Let's see how we can pull a specific branch from GitHub. Now generally whenever you pull from GitHub and you omit the branch name, you are just going to be pulling the default branch. In this case, it's going to be the my local repo. But if you want to pull a specific branch, let's go ahead and create a brand new branch locally, and then we can pull that new branch into that. So let's go ahead and create a new branch, git branch, another test, and we are going to git checkout, another test. Whoops, another test. And if we see git branch, we can see another test is our current working branch. So if we wanted to pull this specific new feature branch and we didn't want to pull the my local repo branch, we could say git pull, and then we could specify the path, so the path to the complete project in GitHub, and then we can specify after that the branch that we want to pull. So maybe we want to pull the new feature branch, so we could say we want to pull only the new feature branch. And if we do that and we enter our passphrase here, we are going to get that new feature branch pulled down from GitHub on the current working branch. So our current branch is the another test branch, and this is the one that received all of the changes, all of the files and everything from the new feature branch. And if we switch over to the main branch here, we switch over to the my local repo branch now, we can see that those changes are no longer there, and it's still in that original state where we left it at. Now there's one more thing that we want to take a look at, and this is the git ignore file. Now the git ignore file is going to specify any files or folders that you do not want tracked by Git. So in many cases, there will be files or folders that you just really don't ever want tracked by Git. And this is especially true whenever you get to something like the backend, where you're working with node modules. So let's go ahead and create a git ignore file. So we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call it a .git ignore, and inside of here we're going to specify any files or folders that we don't want tracked by Git. So let's go ahead and create a new file called special.html, and we'll create a new folder called something, and then inside of there we'll create a file called something special.js. And we do not want to track this folder whatsoever, this whole folder here, along with this special.html file. So let's go ahead and specify inside of the .gitignore file that we don't want to track the special.html file or the something folder. And if we save that, you can see that the something folder and the special.html file both have lost that green coloring where it shows that it needs to be tracked. And it's actually got this light gray coloring that's lighter than just about everything else. And that's basically stating that these files are not going to be tracked by Git. These are specified to not be tracked by Git. So if we take a look here real quick in our terminal and we run a git status, we can see that out of all of those files that we just created, those files and folders that we just created, the only one that still needs to be tracked is the .gitignore file. And of course, this is a file that you do want tracked and you do want to push it to GitHub. That way everyone on the team doesn't have to create one of their own. And that has been a modern guide to Git and GitHub. Now there's all kinds of information about Git and GitHub that I wasn't able to pack into this video, so I will leave a link to the Git docs down in the description down below if you want to go and check it out. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments section down below. I'll answer any questions that you have. Otherwise, if you did like the video, make sure you slap a like on it. Check out the full playlist, link is right down there. Make sure you subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.